Welcome in, everyone, to just another edition of Just Another College Football Podcast. I'm your host, as always, Tommy Brzee. It is August 14th. We are 9 days away from college football being back underway, and we finally have our last conference to predict. We got the SEC for you today. We'll start with some big-time storylines to watch for. Obviously, there is a huge one that we'll start off with. Then we'll talk about all the tiers as I see it as we head into this season for the SEC. We'll jump into some SEC players to watch, and then we'll finish it out. I'll give my championship pick, give all my superlatives. A very, very tough championship to pick, but at the end of the day, I have my pick. I don't know if everyone's going to love it, but at the end of the day, I feel pretty confident in what I got right now. Let's jump into these storylines, though, because there is quite a few things to break down in this conference. I think the biggest one is known, and it's been talked about almost ad nauseum already, but it is Arch Manning. Arch Manning has gotten all the hype in the world, especially from Paul Feinbaum, who thinks he's God's gift to football, it sounds like. But at the end of the day, this will be talked about as much as anything in college football this year. There's no doubt in my mind. Whether you want to talk about Bill Belichick or Deion Sanders or any of the other big-time storylines in college football, they're dwarfed by this kid. There's no two ways about that. The last name brings a lot of energy, a lot of attention, and a lot of expectations. And it's going to be insane to watch this play out. The good or bad, the noise is going to be very deafening around this kid the entire year. I think some of it is a little bit unwarranted. I think some of it is kind of setting him up to fail to make sure that later in the season, if he's not playing too well, you can make sure that you're bashing him just as good as you're praising him right now. But at the end of the day, you're in a position where he's walking into the season as the most anticipated quarterback in college football history. I think you could argue Tim Tebow. You could argue a couple other guys. They don't come close to this guy. Let's just be totally honest. The last name carries a lot of weight in every level of college football, and that Ohio State game will be fascinating. If he comes out on the first drive, they go 75 yards and they score a touchdown, it's immediately that he's winning the Heisman and doing incredible things. If they go 3 and out or he throws a pick on the first drive, he's a bust. He's the worst player in the world, and no one should have hyped him up. So there's no in between, and it's going to get frustrating for just about everyone, including Texas fans, I have to imagine. It's going to be a very, very big topic of conversation, and there's really no way to avoid it, good or bad, for him this season. Moving on to Georgia and Alabama, just more questions for them as we head into the season than we're normally used to. They're always stacked with talent. That's never going to be a question for them, but the quarterbacks are relatively new. Gunnar Stockton and Ty Simpson has been officially named the quarterback at Alabama. We'll talk more about that tomorrow when we get into all that stuff, but a lot of young players on the defensive side of the ball that have to play big-time roles for them, some new weapons that are going to have to hit big time. There's a lot of questions heading into the season for just about everyone in the country. These two have tended to be a little bit above the fray when it comes to those questions, and to a certain extent they still are, but there's still quite a few questions here, and definitely some that, if they're not answered in the affirmative, then these teams could very well miss the CFP this year. The other big-time thing is the hot seat head coaches. There is quite a few guys that are looking over their shoulder right about now, whether you want to talk about Hugh Freeze or Billy Napier or maybe Brian Kelly. That's a little bit different of a situation, but absolutely someone that has pressure on him at the very least heading into this year. I tend to believe at least 2 guys are going to be fired in the SEC this year, either during the year or at the end of it. Whether that's Hugh Freeze and Billy Napier, or Sam Pittman, I think is in a very, very tough spot. People tend to be talking a little bit about Mark Stoops at Kentucky. I think it's going to be really hard for that administration to fire that guy after all he's done for that program, but obviously all of this stuff is very much up in the air. Brent Venables over there at Oklahoma has been a pick. I think that one's a little bit tough because of the buyout, but there's a number of names that you're going to have to watch very, very closely, and if they don't deliver this year, there's going to be a lot of questions around these guys. Whether or not some of them are fired or kept around will be obviously a big-time topic of debate, and even a topic of debate in some of those rooms where they make that decision, but these guys got to deliver. There's no doubt about it. I think the Billy Napier, Hugh Freeze, Sam Pittman, those 3 guys, if none of them hit their win total over, let's say, if none of them get to 8 or 9 wins, I think all of them could be hitting the door. Sam Pittman might have a little bit different of a situation, obviously, but at the end of the day, these guys got to execute, or they could be looking for a new job here pretty soon. New quarterbacks all over the place. There are so many guys that are going to make their first SEC start in week 1 or in week 3 or whenever that does happen for them, but 8 out of the 16 teams are getting guys that are going to make their first SEC start this upcoming year. that's a whole lot. And it's a whole lot of variance that is kind of introduced into this conference. Does Ty Simpson hit, or does he fall a little bit short of expectations? Does John Mateer rise to the occasion of an SEC schedule, or is it a little bit too much of a transition from the pseudo Mountain West schedule he was playing a year ago? Can Bo Pribula hit big, or is he going to be an entire whiff? Or could one of these young quarterbacks, Austin Simmons, Gunnar Stockton, Arch Manning, could they take or DJ Lagway if he's fully healthy? Can all of those guys take that next step and become some of the great talents that a lot of us think that they're going to end up being? It's one of these conferences that I think the defenses are kind of the main headline, at least in my opinion. There are so many great defenses across this conference that I think it's going to come down to which quarterback can just play cleaner football, go about their business, not necessarily put the ball in harm's way, and play just really solid football. Just no frills, no craziness. Just kind of execute the game plan in front of them. And there's 8 guys that are going to be thrown into the fire this year that they have not been thrown into, and it's going to be really fascinating to watch which ones rise to the moment, which ones shrink away from it. You'll probably find that has a lot to do with which teams find their way to Atlanta and then possibly find their way to the CFP from this conference. This is the most interesting one to me. Who's 10-2 becomes a 7-5? Because I can almost promise you that this is going to happen this year in this conference. There are a lot of teams that expect to go at least 10-2 this year, or 9-3, or at least be in the CFP conversation is probably the best way to put it. One of those teams, or maybe multiple of those teams, are going to go 7-5. I can almost promise you that. Now, I do have a picture of Tennessee there. They're not necessarily my pick to do that because I think that defense is going to be plenty good. But at the end of the day, they are absolutely someone that's up for this award, quote unquote. Not really an award, but at the end of the day, they're in the running for this to possibly happen. I think South Carolina is another team. Maybe Oklahoma, John Mateer doesn't hit the way that they're expecting. South Carolina with a lot of guys moving on. There's quite a few teams that are sitting in this realm of, we did really well last year. We either made the CFP or we're right on the outside looking in. We got to take a step forward. We got to make the CFP again in Tennessee's case, or in Ole Miss or South Carolina's case. We got to make the CFP this year. Got to take that next step that one of them's not going to, or maybe multiple of them are not going to. There's not enough oxygen in the room. There's so many different teams that want to make a CFP run this year. By my count, it's about 12 different teams in this conference that I don't want to say expect that, but are looking to possibly make a CFP run this upcoming year that there's not enough oxygen in the room. At some point, a couple of those teams are going to fall, and one of those teams is going to fall like a rock. And we'll figure out who that's going to be, whether it's Tennessee or it's an Auburn team that really needs to execute this year for Hugh Freeze to continue working there, or an A&M team that has a lot of hype going into this year with Marcel Reed. One of those teams, or probably 2 or 3 of those teams, are going to get to the end of the season and just feel like they left so much on the table, lost so many one-score games, and felt like they could have been 10-2 if they made a couple more plays, and they're 7-5, and they're way out of the conversation for the CFP. And then, obviously, returning to the topic of college football is going to be a topic of conversation around the SEC this year. There's a lot of people that are staking a lot on this. Paul Feinbaum said he would leave the country if the SEC did not win the national championship this year. Now, I tend to believe he's probably going to go on a vacation and come on back, but at the end of the day, it's going to be a really interesting thing to watch. If Georgia doesn't win the entire thing, obviously their fans don't want the other teams to win it. But as a conference, Greg Sankey and all the people in that office very much want to get back on top of the sport. They are a little sick of hearing the trash talk from the Big Ten, and very warranted trash talk from the Big Ten over the last couple of years. They want to get back on top. I've talked about this before. I tend to believe the SEC has more teams that are capable of winning the national title than the Big Ten. I also think the Big Ten might have 2 or 3 of the best options out of the top maybe 5 options in the country to win the national title. So that's a little bit of a tough spot for them to be put in, but there's plenty of teams that can do it from the SEC, mainly 4 teams that I'm really circling that absolutely could lift the trophy at the end of the season, and we'll talk about it. Right after this, we'll get into my tiers as I see it in this conference, a very weird conference, one of those that you can break down. I feel like the top tier is pretty much set. I think the middle tier is an absolute nightmare, and we'll talk about it right after this, so stick with us.